what I'd like to deal with in this last segment is the topic of human sacrifice. Now you may think, whoa, that's kind of a odd sort of topic, but I saw in one of the social media platforms I was in a question as to why societies performed human sacrifice throughout ancient times, and maybe not so ancient times. Most of us consider technological advancement as being, totally opposite or alien to the concept of human sacrifice. And I think that's just because of our modern society, in which we look at other modern societies and think, well, they don't do this anymore. This is something that was done way, way back in our past. So obviously, technology and education and all these other things must be the reason that we don't do this. I beg to differ. I would actually say the reason we don't do it is because of the prevailing religious views that won out, especially those of the West. And by the West, I'm also going to include the Near East, because the Abrahamic religions include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And if we go back to the origins, the prophet that is common to all three of these religions, that's Abraham. And Abraham, one of the big reasons why he broke with his society was over human sacrifice. Thus the irony when God actually asked him to sacrifice his son, not so he will sacrifice him, but to see how loyal he was to the God that is the God of the Abrahamic religions. And the thing is that we must keep in mind is that this spread out throughout the world. If we consider that about almost half of the world's population today belongs to one of the Abrahamic religions, either at least in name or very devoutly. And the thing is that technology, what we think of as technology, the Industrial Revolution, it sprang up in the Christian West. And so generally, this is why we tend to look back and think, okay, well, the peoples of ancient Europe had sacrificed, therefore it was part of being ancient. No. It was because they had a different set of religious values than when Christianity came in. And there was human sacrifice in North Africa and parts of the Middle East before Islam became the dominant religion there. And therefore we didn't see human sacrifice as part of the religion of the masses practiced anymore. Now, let's suppose history had been different. Let us suppose, now just imagine with me, that the civilizations of Mesoamerica, which were highly advanced civilizations in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and many other fields, agriculture. My gosh, much of what we eat today is from these regions and was developed, cultivated in these regions. Let's say either or both the Aztec and the Inca had developed mechanization. Now you got to remember, these societies, as well as others in the area, practiced human sacrifice. Sometimes it was using prisoners of war. Sometimes it was using subjugated peoples. And other times it might involve even the members of the upper class, their children. If things were kind of tough, like there was a famine or something else, to appease the gods, you often had children of the elite who were, treated with a great deal of luxury, prepared for this sacrifice, and sometimes it was on the altars. Sometimes it was during specific ceremonies, often involving dances. And sometimes it was taking them to a high mountaintop and doing the sacrifice. But nevertheless, they did human sacrifice. Now, what if these societies had been able to remain somewhat isolated and had actually learned how to use labor-saving devices and then had continued the advancement that started pretty much, even though there were some mechanizations that were employed in the Roman and Greek times, it really kind of took over after the Great Plagues that reduced the labor supply. Therefore, you had to find more efficient ways to do work and to make money. And, when you have labor shortages, you find ways to save on labor. And that started the springboard to, well, you'd invent this product, then you invent this one, and of course, because you have this one, now this gives you the idea for this one, and so on and so on and so on, and eventually you're flying to the moon and sending satellites out past the solar system. What if the Mesoamericans had developed this? Well, then, even if maybe some of the other cultures around the world had not done this, let's say everything else remains the same, you could easily have had a situation in which the societies would have looked far more, they would have looked like something technological. Lights, modern transportation, television, and maybe when you did maybe when you had annual events to honor the gods, you would march people, virgins, so forth, up the pyramid, and there would be cameras set up and, commentators reporting on this year's festivities, and that would have included these sacrifices that would have taken place. There's nothing that actually would say that it would not have been something that could have occurred in an advanced civilization. So did Atlantis take place? Was it here? Who knows? Did they have human sacrifice? Again, who knows? But there is no reason to believe that you could not have had such a thing take place in a modern technological society if history would have been even slightly altered. Okay? And for all we know, there's planets out there that have humans on them that they do this sort of thing. And you would think nothing more of it than you would an annual beauty pageant or sports event. Now, why did these societies do this? Well, the simple answer, of course, that people might come up with is that it had to do with superstition and or barbarism. I think it was a little bit more complicated than that. I mean, we do sacrifices today, if you think about it, in religion. Part of Islam is, a major part of it is the submission of yourself to God and His will. Therefore, you're sacrificing yourself. Christianity, much the same. One of the charges that used to be labeled against Christians by the Romans, in maybe what you would call their fake news, was that the Christian sacrament was in some way a form of vampirism and a type of sacrifice. And, because you're taking the blood and the flesh of Christ. And so we have these elements in our society. We often will even tell people, you've got to sacrifice. That's a big word. We got to sacrifice for this, this, and this. Human sacrifice, of course, is far different than the Abrahamic religion's concept of sacrifice. And, we go back to Abraham and his son in order to, really know that's for sure. However, what was the whole point of sacrifice for societies that did perform human sacrifice? Was it, like I said, barbarism? No. Actually, I think what it was first of all, it was their religion that told them that this was necessary. Their religion taught that it was necessary. So again, if their technology in those areas of Mesopotamia would have reached the industrial stage where they would not have been threatened by people from Africa, Asia, Europe coming in and taking over, then they could quite easily have preserved their religion and adapted it to a modern world, as we see a modern world. But there are several aspects of sacrifice that I think people often forget. One of them is that human nature, at least I think most of us would agree, maybe that's wrong, who knows, but human nature tends to project out, and when you see someone suffering or their life being ended, this creates a great deal of discomfort, especially for those who have high empathy. So the thing is, people have to be conditioned to actually be able to watch such a thing. They have to really feel that this is something worthwhile and necessary, especially if it might be someone they know or someone they're related to that's being taken up the altar. And so one of the theories I have is that the power structure, the power elite of a society that would allow human sacrifice or even promote it, would be using this as a method of control of the people, a method by which you're able to bring them more into subjugation, which is always a main priority and concern for the elite of any society. Because ultimately, you cannot possibly support, feed, and otherwise buy the services of an army or military police big enough to keep control of the masses if they decide they don't want to be controlled. You have to rely on psychology. All societies do this, and I don't care what society it is on earth today. It relies on psychology. It relies on the policeman in the mind to keep people in order, to keep them in check, to make sure that things just don't fall apart. And people say, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to take it anymore. And it's time to change governments. So the thing is, I think sacrifice, especially in very complex societies, not only was a method by which you were saying, hey, look, I've got a special connection to God or the gods, and they say this is necessary. If your priest has that kind of control, that even the royal ethnic societies that would control these massive multi-million people empires, the priests, they must have had such an awe that came over them. Not a revulsion, but more of a, wow, this guy, he really is powerful, and I better respect him. I mean, God even gives him the ability to take life. Now, on top of that, think about the psychological control that the elite, through these priests, would exercise over the people, because since they go out in these masses, they probably, there was probably standing room only in these courtyards that oversaw the pyramids when they had those kind of sacrifices. The elite were able to know that these people Well, back up there. The people knew what was going on, and by the fact that they're there watching this means they're taking part vicariously. And at the same time, there's probably no one jumping up saying, hey, stop this. This is wrong. Maybe they'd wind up on the altar there pretty quick themselves if they did. So therefore, the mere fact that you were kind of an accessory, that meant that you were, part of the act. That means you were unified with all those other people. When the Romans would do these conspiracies, the Roman elite would decide to knock off someone who was really powerful or otherwise do something illegal, they would often do something like this together, murder someone together. And then the idea was, now this totally unified you. So you weren't going to snitch because you had blood on your hands too. So this, I think, is probably the most powerful reason why elites in these societies maintained this control. Now, they, of course, could have believed in the religion as well. And, of course, some people would say, well, eventually if they would have advanced technologically, they might have just substituted cows, or if they'd had, I'm not sure if they had domesticated cows, but there was other things they could have sacrificed. And I'm sure in some ceremonies they did. But the thing is that nothing would be so emotionally binding as this. And if you think about it, the Roman Colosseum, when, not the gladiators, because the gladiators, again, I have that in my book, arena sports. The gladiators rarely killed one another. I mean, that would be like taking your star quarterback from, the teams that played in the Super Bowl and have them fight and one of them be killed. It would be way too valuable. And if you did that, the other side in the Roman era would have to, if a gladiator were killed, the victor's owner or sponsor, depending on their status, would have to pay for the loss of that other gladiator. But when you had the exhibition games, where you had slaves or criminals or prisoners of war fight to the death, and also fight, be sent out to be eaten by animals. This also was not just a entertainment thing. It was not just to get the ratings up, the whole bread and circuses thing, but it also tended to, I would say, subconsciously, again, traumatize what would be normal and natural in a human being. Therefore, to make sense of it, you had to support what was going on. You couldn't go to the games and feel, guilty, because then that would cause you to question your entire society. But human nature tends to, through, when you have cognitive dissonance, doing something or being part of something that goes against some other cherished value, such as, hey, it's wrong to kill people. Then we rationalize and make excuses, and therefore this unifies people to the people who support this, who sponsor it, who maintain it, the priest class, the political class, and so forth. And it just filters down. So in conclusion, I really think that this was a very powerful way to control societies. And if a society had developed technology and not had any religious reasons for opposing sacrifice, then you easily could have seen this, take place. And who knows, maybe in the future, 10,000 years from now, we'll have a totally different attitude on Earth. And these kinds of things will take place, and they will be televised if there's, television at that point. It's just that I think that explains the concept, and not just some sort of bloodlust that, people have often associated with it. Anyway, that's all the time we have now. I would encourage people to check back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.